All right, Joe, welcome back to the podcast. And I want to start by throwing you into a situation. All right. This is a situation you've probably actually been in before, especially as a pastor. It can be a bit of an awkward one. But let's say that you've got a friend who's got some sort of struggle in his life and he's wrestling with something and he calls you over to talk about it and he wants to visit, just kind of hash things out. And as you are discussing with him, where his struggles are and maybe giving him advice, you find you recall some things coming to mind from maybe a book you read that's helping him. And then you look while you're sitting in his living room over at his bookshelf and you actually see the exact book that you just quoted. And you're like, wow, that book is there. He has it. He owns it. And you go over to it. And you pull it off the bookshelf and it is crisp and clean and completely unopened. And especially that, look, I can tell you, I can throw this scenario out there because this has happened to me as somebody who's a church leader. I have given away so many books to people in our church and then eventually go to their house to find they never even opened them. It never even opened them at all. And yet we're still, wrestling with the same issues. What has this been an experience that you recognize at all?
Yeah, I mean, it's not an age that people lack information that's not within reach. So yeah, I think often, you look and, there's a whole variety of books that people might have on their shelf to help them with a specific topic. But sometimes they're unopened. And then sometimes what's even more scary is they have been opened and you can see that they have been read. And, there's something that would be so applicable, but for whatever reason, there's this disconnect between maybe sermons listened to, books read, and just the life that they're actually living. And that's an additional challenge.
Yeah, there is a bit of a frustration, and I have it on both ends. There's a frustration that I have as a church leader with, walking into someone's home, or, you walk into a thrift store. I think that, man, church leaders are inadvertently filling the bookshelves of our thrift stores, right? We're giving away these books at sermon series, and they just end up at the thrift store. But so there's a frustration you can feel as a church leader of saying, why aren't people getting it? I'm giving them free books. But then there's also the frustration, just as a man that wants to grow spiritually, that I feel with, look, reading's hard. If it's not a habit, if it's not a routine that you have, if it's not something that ever captured your attention, then you just don't care, honestly. And it's not, you can give me all the books you want, but unless I actually have a desire to read or I find that there is value in it, I'm not going to do it. And that's just kind of where we find most guys these days. Reading is not an important habit that they have. And even if, I kind of like what you even went further with, even if they do read, are they reading well in such a way that is actually helpful for their spiritual lives?
Yeah, it's one of the surprising things I think about becoming a Christian. I was talking to a guy this last week, and he was asking, like, do all Christians read? Like, he just keeps hearing, he gets book recommendations. And like you said, I mean, he's now got this stack of books, and he's coming from just a typical world of guys, outside the church, where a lot of guys never think to pick up a book, and then all of a sudden people are throwing books at him left and right. Yeah. And so there's a sense of guilt. There's this sense of kind of paralysis. Where do I even begin? And, because of it, I mean, he just was honest. It's like, I've got all these books. I've not read any of them yet. And, was asking where to begin. And it's a hard question for men.
It is. And I think it's made even worse when we think about sometimes there's a clear separation in the kind of guys that do read, or a perceived separation, the kind of guys that do read, especially when you start talking about theology, and the kind of guys that do read on theology and things like that, and the guys that don't. And what happens is, I think ultimately guys have, the ordinary Christian man gives up completely on reading about theology because he's been convinced that the only people that do that are in the seminaries. They're the only pathway to learning more about God and pursuing that kind of education. It's really, look, it's go to seminary or nothing else. And that's kind of the options that we've given guys, but there's got to be more out there, right?
Yeah, there's got to be a way to get the information that we need. And as Christians, there is information. That's the thing. We can't not be thinkers. We got to think outside what we thought was relevant, because we learn all these truths that we didn't know and the world doesn't talk about. So we've got to consume information, but we need to find a way to do so in a way that actually, we digest it, we retain it, and ultimately it's transformative. And that's where, honestly, a lot of guys I know that read the most books, they're not the most mature Christians. They can have certain conversations. They know about certain ideas. They know certain vocabulary, but there's still the disconnect between what they've read and how they're actually living. And so, what guys need to be asking is, how do I learn for transformation? How do I get what I need to know in a way that actually changes me so I can be the man that God, has called me to be? I mean, that's where I think every guy should agonize.
That is, yes. If you've got a great answer to that question, I'm waiting to hear it, because here's the thing. What I want us to wrestle with is I see guys that are struggling with a stale devotional life. And I think that some of this, at the root of some of this, is a lot of guys' theological education kind of peaked at vacation Bible school. And that was it. Like we learned everything we know about God at VBS in the summer when we were a kid. And we just never, unless someone convinced us to go to seminary, then we just didn't, pursue that kind of education. I think that some of it gets to what you just outlined there, is that guys haven't learned to read in a transformative way and haven't seen the approach to reading as something that can lead to a further helpful education. So I'm going to throw that out at you now, because I do want to then take a step back and say, well, how do we do that? How do we, as ordinary guys, read in a way that actually is helpful and have grow a desire for reading?
Yeah, there is something guys can do, and we're going to get there. It's a spiritual discipline they've probably not heard of. They've certainly not thought about, but I think they can really have a dramatic effect. But to get there, we kind of need to do two things. On the one hand, we need to be honest about what learning entails, like what we're doing that's not working versus what's required. Because it's only if you can kind of see, okay, just reading books, it's not going to do it. Might make me feel good because I'm turning pages, but it's not actually what I need to grow. And so once you can see, okay, well, what kind of learning am I after? Then you can come back around and you can see how, there are spiritual disciplines that can help us really read, learn for transformation.
Yeah. And that's ultimately where I want to, all right. So I want to take us there right now, is to help guys see that learning well matters a lot. Reading for transformation matters a lot, and maybe more. It matters more than the number of books that you read, right? Or being that kind of guy. So, what are the kind of questions that guys need to be asking as they open a book, or as they start to think about, well, I want to become this kind of learner? What do you see that works for you, Joe?
Yeah. So first of all, you got to differentiate between scanning words and actually meditating on truth. This may sound really, kind of abstract, but, it's so easy to read about something without pausing and actually letting your mind go to the thing that's being talked about. So, let's say you're reading about the cross, and you're just, you're reading sentence after sentence, paragraph after paragraph. You never actually pause and think, okay, what is this being said? Or what's being said here? You never really stop to think about the cross itself. You're just trying to get through the chapter so you can close the book and be done for the day. That doesn't do anything for you, because you can scan as many words as you want and at the end of it not have any clue what you've just read. The question is, have you stopped anywhere long enough, focused your mind on any object long enough such that that has left an imprint on your mind and then on your heart as well? So it's a difference between consuming lots of words versus pausing to reflect and think about truth. That's the first question that guys have to ask if they really want to learn well.
Well, I think part of what you're describing there is introducing curiosity to your approach to reading and learning, right? It's one thing to, just take and open and flip through the pages and read the book. It's another thing to step back and say, wait a second, is there something here that I don't know or that I need to think more about? And some of this comes with just a posture of, look, I'll admit right now, Joe, I don't know everything there is to know about God. I will admit that right now. Okay. And so some of this is just saying, hey, I got something to learn today, right? Yeah. To be able to open up, say, I got something, let me be curious. Let me think about this in a way that may actually affect my life.
Yeah, that's right. And I think from there, where guys need to think is they've got to get outside of the straitjacket of what they think is relevant. So part of the challenge as Christians is it's like, we've got a whole continent. You think of, the early explorers, and it's all got to be mapped. We have to have a sense of what are the fundamental truths that God has revealed. And the problem is often in our culture, we're stuck thinking about relevance. And if I think of my kids, if I asked them, what do you care about? Like, what do you think is meaningful? I guarantee budgeting is not going to be on their list. It's just not. How's that relevant in life? I mean, life is just about having fun and playing sports. But Christian truth's kind of like that. Like there's something that guys may not be interested in. Like, let's say the high priesthood of Jesus, they've maybe not thought about it. It's not what they're focused on in terms of the workday. But if they don't ever go explore and learn about the high priesthood of Jesus, it's going to affect how they fight against sin. It's going to affect their struggle with shame and guilt. And so partly we've got to be willing to read and think outside the narrow constraints of what we think is important and go broad and find ways to explore what God says is important. And so that's, again, if guys are going to learn well, they've got to think at that, in that way.
Yeah. And along with that, as we read, being the kind of guys who are not just reading broadly like that because Joe said it's a good idea. There are a lot of times that we maybe pick up books or a list of books on all the broad subjects because we think that's what we're supposed to do. Like a growing Christian man that wants to look like that kind of guy, well, he has these kind of books on his bookshelf. But instead, it's more being the kind of guy who asks questions as he's reading stuff. And so you find those broad topics. Then you got to step back and say, wait. I got questions about this. Right. And be willing to ask those questions. Be willing to say, I'm not quite sure what all this means. The high priesthood of Jesus, what is that? And why does that matter to me? I think the right questions make a difference here, because even just asking that simple question after you read, if I really believed this, how would that change my behavior today?
Yeah.
I think you at that point, if you're asking those kind of questions, you don't have to read a lot. It really doesn't take much for it to make a transformative difference in your day. If you're asking the kind of question, well, what if I believe this? How does it change me?
Yeah. And I think that gets to kind of the next question, which is just, am I digesting what I'm learning? And that image of digestion is so useful because when you take food, it's something outside of you, you chew it up, but then you actually swallow and it actually gets assimilated. It becomes a part of you. And, the whole goal of this, it is that we actually digest, like you say, that once I figured out, okay, this applies, but then it becomes a part of me. If this is, especially we're talking about God's truth, spiritual truths, these things are meant to shape us. They're meant to direct our feet. They're meant to change how we view things around us, rewire our mind. All of that needs to happen. And so again, am I actually taking the time to reflect? And is it producing change? These are, that's where we're trying to get to.
Yeah. All right. So now you've got a guy in front of you, Joe, ordinary Christian man. He's a guy that's, maybe he's a teacher in your community. Maybe he's a mechanic. He's got a full-time demanding job. He's got a young family that he's raising, got a lot of responsibilities on him. Having a devotional life in and of itself is a challenge, but as we talked about already, this is just kind of a spiritual discipline that's got to rise up. Even when we talk about reading itself, pursuing education, this does have to at some point be a discipline. But is the answer for that guy that wants to learn and grow more now a set of 12 books? Do you have like a 12 book, thick book recommendation for him as he starts his path of pursuing growth?
Yeah. The good news is I'm not going to recommend for people to get, the complete works of the Puritans or something to put on their shelf. If a guy thinks he's about to have more books on his nightstand, actually, I'm going to surprise him because I'm going to tell him to clear all of that off and give him a very small set of things to read and think about. And so what I would really encourage guys, really where we're going with all of this is once you begin to appreciate the difference between just scanning words and learning well, then you ask that question, how do I learn well? And the way you learn well is not by more words, it's by less words. And this is this spiritual discipline I mentioned earlier. that if guys will learn the discipline of meditating on classic hymns, that they can actually get more benefit, cover more ground. They can have that comprehensive sweep, and they can digest truth in such a way that is really transformative with less pages and even with less time. And that's why I think guys should be excited about trying this.
Yeah. So what you're introducing, we introduced this in our last episode as well, the idea of what we're calling a hymn workout. And I like that phrasing because you're introducing a concept that's broader than just read this hymn. That's not what it's titled, right?
Here's that won't do anything.
Thing to read. Yeah, here's another thing to read. And although it's less words, which is great, I think there's something even bigger beyond this concept of here's another thing to throw on your, bookshelves, guys. So why is it called hymn workouts as opposed to read this hymn?
Right. Because everything we said about lazy learning is true for hymns as well. You can, with a workout, you can go through the motions and get no benefit. And again, that's what we do when we flip pages. Or you can engage yourself and exert yourself, and you can see growth. And it's the same mentally that it's going to take exertion, it's going to take involvement, but if we do it, we can see growth. And part of what I like about hymns, we're going to talk in a minute to try to, I think, change how guys think of hymns, because we bring all kinds of assumptions that make us biased against them. But part of what I like, it's the fact that there is some difficulty. I know that's going to scare guys, but let's just be honest. If you get on a bench and if you just do the bar, and if it's easy, how much are you going to get from it? So all of these new contemporary Christian books that are like business, the best-selling books, they're so easy to consume. You don't even have to think. And then you close them and you've learned nothing. The problem is we want some, strain. We want some exertion. We want some words we don't know. We want to have to think about Bible references because it's in the effort that we're going to actually see the learning.
Yeah, there's something to the strain there that you're talking about that does pique my interest because on the one hand, I do like the idea of filling my bookshelves, Joe. Like I do. I like the idea of filling my bookshelves with all those books you just mentioned, and there's good to be had in them for sure.
Sure.
But on the other hand, when I look at the long-term me that I want to be, that guy, 10, 15, 20 years down the road, I know that he needs more than just the already 10, 15 years of those books on my bookshelves. Like I know that there's got to be a little bit more there. And ultimately what it takes, I think, is more exertion that you're talking about. Like maybe there's a way that I can exercise my mind, my imagination in such a way that it grows me to be that kind of man that I have in my head down the road. And yeah, okay. Hymns is an interesting approach to get us there. So I'm going to ask you, I know I asked you this last episode, but I want to ask you again, Joe, why hymns? And this is coming from a guy, I grew up in church. So I grew up singing hymns. My mom sang hymns to me all throughout my childhood. I loved them, know them. But there's a lot of guys out there that don't even know what a hymn is or just totally turned off by him. So why would you, if you want to exert guys, exercise their minds, attention, all that, why choose hymns?
I mean, I realize this is going to take some work to convince guys. This is like asking guys to wear a knitted cardigan. It's like everything associated with it is not what I want to be. So why on earth? Well, we can go through some reasons. One reason is just the way, as poetry, hymns condense information. So if you look at it that way, if you look at, you can have a 250-page book on the cross. It covers lots and lots of information. That writer is trying to, in a sense, fill pages. He feels free to add words. The wonder of a hymn is that the writer is doing the opposite. He's saying, okay, every word that's not needed, I'm going to take out. Yes. And the result of that is less. And if guys don't want to have to stare at lots and lots of words, what you get with a hymn is this is essential. Every single one of these is necessary to communicate something, which means if I think about each one, it's going to convey something very specific to me. And it's that thoughtfulness that goes into it that makes them more precious.
Yeah, there's definitely something to that. It's interesting you phrase it that way because I had heard a guy one time who was telling me how he wrote poetry and how to attempt to write poetry. I'm not a guy that writes poetry, but but I am interested in the process there. Like, I think it's interesting there because there's something fascinating about few lines, a lot of thought. And the approach he said to take is to start by writing a story, whatever it is that you're trying to say, write it out, write the whole story, and then take that thing and begin deleting one word at a time from that story until the story no longer makes sense. When you can no longer delete any words and you lose the essence of what that is about, all right, now you've got a poem. That's what you ultimately end up with. And that poem is able to, in just a few short lines, tell a whole story, but only with a few words. And I think that is something beautiful that, you bring out in hymns is we are able to take, I don't have to go buy the big systematic theology books, although you can and go for it, but you can get some of that, right, in just a few short stanzas.
Yeah, you really can. And I think, one of the things we keep talking about are classic hymns. And I think that word classic is so important. And that leads to another aspect of hymns. And that's, these things have stood the test of time. And the way I would describe it to guys is if you've ever been to like a national park, someplace known for its beauty, but if you notice, not every part of a path has a bench at it, but every once in a while, if you keep going around a path, you'll hit a bench. And the reason that bench is there is because people stop, and person after person stopped. And finally, somebody figured out like that is a vista that everybody who visits this park, you should sit there and view the mountains from this angle. And these hymns, when you get to a classic hymn, it's the same sort of thing. Generation after generation has paused and said, this is a vista, maybe of the incarnation, maybe of, just the joy that comes from having sins forgiven, maybe the courage that's needed to face suffering. But you got to sit here and you've got to see God from this particular point of view. And so again, we're talking about, the unmissable angles. And so if you want to hit those, go to these classic hymns. They're going to map that terrain for you. Yeah.
That's helpful in the way you phrase it, because here's how I would then pitch a hymn to guys. Now that you said that, this is a poem, or it may be a poem isn't a good way to start because you're going to lose guys there, but here's something written by an ordinary Christian guy from years past who was struggling with something in his Christian life. And the only way for him to work through it, and the only way for him to see through the other side, was to write this down and to meditate on it so much that it ultimately transformed him. And he left that for you. This guy that struggled with something in the past, wrestled with it, meditated on it. He left you this note to hear today so that you can read, because you're in the same situation probably.
Yeah. And I think that, that gets at something so vital is, for ordinary guys, often theology books, they feel like something that have been written by professors, often an ivory tower in some academic environment, fighting with other academics and other ivory towers. And it just feels really disengaged from ordinary life. And that's not the nature of hymns. Hymns are songs of the trenches. Hymns are things, people, like you said, ordinary Christians struggling with the loss of children, struggling with, ongoing depression and temptation, struggling with nagging guilt and shame. Those Christians wrote these hymns from their struggle. And so the beauty is that it connects the theory, so to speak, the theology with the practice in the everyday. And so again, it's not something that's going to just pull you into some abstract realm where you're thinking about all these intellectual ideas. It's going to prepare you to step out into a difficult world, but to do so knowing God, knowing his grace, knowing what other Christians have experienced of his faithfulness. And so you'll be that much more ready for just ordinary, everyday spiritual combat.
That's great. So what we're ultimately telling guys is that they can learn more with less words, right? Really what they need. Hey, you take a piece of paper, just one piece of paper with words on it and you can gain a lot from that, as opposed to filling your bookshelves with these big books. And not trying to tell guys to don't buy books, but to say to the ordinary guy, hey, on one piece of paper, you can find a lot of growth. So now, Joe, I'm going to ask you to prove it. I'm going to tell you to put your money where your mouth is, because here's the thing. And guys can find these piece of papers. I'll say at hymnworkouts.com, we have these hymns that you can print out and with reflection questions and walk you through the practice of doing this. But I want you to show us that this can work. So do you have a hymn just that you are willing to maybe take a few minutes to walk through?
Yeah, yeah. One of my favorites is When I Survey. It's an old one, but it's one most people know. You've heard it, even a more contemporary version. But we're talking about 4 stanzas usually that come in this hymn. And I would tell guys, you want to be transformed by the cross. These 4 stanzas you've got to sit with. And what's so powerful, that first line, when I survey the wondrous cross. So it distinguishes between not when I just take a glance and then get on with my task list. When I stop and I really measure and look and gaze, something happens. So that's the first question. Am I willing to do that? Now, but if you just look at this first stanza, when I survey the wondrous cross on which the Prince of Glory died, my richest gain I count but loss and pour contempt on all my pride. Now, I'm a guy. One of my biggest struggles is pride. I mean, it is the dragon that slays me every day. How on earth do I actually reach a place where that pride can actually be vanquished? Well, I'm interested in that. This hymn, it tells me, and I'm not going to go through all of it, but what's so powerful is it takes you right to the cross. You can touch Jesus. That's how close you are. And you're saying, see from his head, his hands and feet, sorrow and love flow mingled down. Did e'er such love and sorrow meet, or thorns compose so rich a crown? Now, this is a particular view. From the non-believer's point of view, this guy, he's just a victim. He's just dying. It's gruesome. It's ugly. But from the eyes of faith, we see something different. We see a beauty. We see a love that's incomparable. And when you sit there at the cross for long enough to really recognize the beauty and the sacrifice that Christ is making for us, something miraculous happens. And it's the last stanza. You get to this place where you say, were the whole realm of nature mine, that were a present far too small, love so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life, my all. Rather than me wanting to build the world around my ego, you get to this place where you say, hey, if I had it all, I'd want you to have it, God. That's the opposite of pride. What did it? It was sitting before the cross. And so again, if guys struggle with pride, go to that hymn. Sit for a few minutes really at the feet of Jesus. Imaginatively picture his suffering on your behalf and see what begins to happen in your heart. I think guys will recognize that there'll be some really dramatic effects.
That's super helpful. Thanks for walking through that briefly with us, Joe. Because here's the thing, guys. You struggle with the things that are brought out in these hymns. Joe just showed it to you there, even just with pride, right? We all see this. We don't know what to do with it. And we can read these we can, maybe buy a book, maybe read it, but probably don't understand it or even do anything about it. What we need is that transformational power there. What we need is something that's going to grab us in a few short words and that's going to last throughout our day. And hopefully we've shown just in a few stanzas how the ordinary guy who's got a busy life can take this, grab a hold of it, actually put it to use. So if you're the kind of guy that's like looking for something that will bring you to that next point of, hey, I can grow, I can learn, I don't have to go to seminary, I don't have to, there's actually an applicable way for me to do this. You can go to hymnworkouts.com and you will see we have a book. Do you have the book you can show to the guys watching?
Yeah.
There you go. There's a copy of the book right there. We have a book that you can buy. So if you just want to like go for it and jump in, man, we got 100 spiritual exercises in this book, guys. 100 exercises, all ranging in different topics that guys struggle with. All right, for you to grab and do as a daily devotional. Or if you're a guy that just still needs a little more convincing or a little more help, go to hymnworkouts.com and click on the training videos. Just click workouts in the top right. And what you'll get is some videos of Joe walking through some of these hymns like a personal trainer, somebody that's trying to help you see that park bench that you need to see that's on this trail of this beauty of God. So y'all check that out. Hopefully it's a good help to y'all. And then we're going to come back next week and talk about this a little more.